Welcome back, everyone, and welcome, Robin Stewart. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sally. It's really great to see you.
All right, so what we want to do now is we're going to dig into, we've been talking about international students studying in the US. We've been talking about US students studying outside the US. How does any of this get paid for if you're not in the 1%? let's
Got it.
dig into that.
Good question. Okay, a lot to talk about, and I have a feeling we're going to flip-flop back and forth. And so just to define, for purposes of our conversation today, when I'm talking about international students, it's not only, the F1 student visa holders or scholars. We're talking anybody who's here. So if mom and dad have a work visa, you're considered an international student. There's resources available. I know there's sort of, I don't want to say a myth, because in some cases it's very much true. And I have a feeling we're going to talk about it, where you might see something on a website that says along these lines, if a student's able to pay full price for college, you should really consider doing so with family funds. However, there are resources available. I would say the majority of the way that an international student pays for a school here in the US would be institutional aid or merit scholarships, so the school's own money. And then, kind of after that, family funds. If you are going to look for that scholarship dollars, right, there is some available, whether from the college itself or private outside external scholarships, but it does require some work, and it also requires that the family sort of address that question of selectivity. So, and I know you have this conversation with the families that you work with. If you are looking at certain schools in the US and you're hoping for some assistance, depending on those schools, there may be none available, right? If I'm Princeton or an Ivy League school, I don't have to work very hard to recruit applicants, so I don't have to offer merit scholarships, which also happen to be the kind of money an international student might be able to take advantage of. So it's a decision a family has to make. Many things drive this process, right? Cost is one of many factors, but for some families, it's a pretty important factor. And, everyone, even the 1%, has to pay their bill.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I used to work at Whittier College, which was a college that admitted, I don't know, around 80% of those who applied. I'm not sure exactly where they are now, but they're still accepting a good majority of those who apply. And, we had international students coming with scholarships. I don't think anybody got a full ride, but it was much cheaper than it would have been for some of these students to, say, go to University of Chicago, where we actually did offer some aid to international students, but boy, was it hard to get. I mean, it's already hard to get in, and then to be one of the few international students who actually got aid. And this was at a college that funded everybody else, right? Every domestic student got full aid. They might not get a scholarship, but their need was fully met. So that was always, notable to me.
Yeah, it is tricky, right? If you're that international student who's applying to a school like University of Chicago and you are eligible, so all the stars kind of have to align, and you get in. I know from, working with families, another conversation that they really have to have is, okay, if I apply to a school and I'm eligible for aid, do I want to take the chance that my admission application will be looked at through a different lens, where it might be harder to get in because it is a school that's committing 100% to all students once they're accepted to meet their eligibility? So it is a conversation I think that a lot of families really have to understand up front as they kind of, make their list and work through the process.
Yeah, it's interesting because for a domestic student, I always say apply for aid if you need it, because there's going to be enough schools that'll, it's relatively few schools that will not admit you, that are going to be need aware. But for international students, the equation definitely changes. So.
Yep, that's true. Absolutely. And the other thing too that I always like to let families know is, you don't want to, well, this would be international or domestic. I think it's good advice for anybody. Don't apply and say you don't need the assistance if you truly can't afford it.
Yeah.
With international students, you want to read the fine print and make sure you understand that if you don't apply during that first year, and this is the case at at various schools, you may be shut off from institutional aid in subsequent years. So deadlines, of course, are important, but also the fact that you even filed in that first year.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, what is the Declaration of Finances? That's a term that I don't even know what it is, but I've heard it before. So I was hoping you could explain it for
Sounds
international
patriotic, right?
students. Yeah, exactly.
So this applies specifically to students who are coming here on an F1 student visa. I'll say for the most part, a lot of times, right, it depends. I know from working with some families where dad might have been on a work visa, for example, they also had to demonstrate finances. But in this context here, it's a document that the school is going to require in order to issue what's called the I-20. So the Declaration of Finances is basically, you're a student, you're showing and demonstrating and documenting that you have adequate proof of funding for 1 year. Every student, in order to get the I-20 issued, will need to have submitted certain documents. And they all need to be, sort of liquid, right, within 48 hours. Bank statements are acceptable, a letter from a sponsor, paperwork from a loan from a lender. It could even be a financial aid offer or letter from the school, cash saving bank accounts. So that all counts as acceptable documentation. Okay. So it is a lot, but you want to make sure you're checking with the school because they may say it needs to be in English, right? Or it needs to be notarized or certified. It needs to have your currency on there or the equivalent, right, of what it would be in US dollars. So you want to make sure and certainly reach out to, and it's actually the admissions office who handles this process, even though, we're talking finances here. Colleges, so this is upfront before a student is actually accepted. Colleges may require proof of funding in subsequent years as well. It's just something that I like students to know. But for the I-20, it's all about this documentation, the Declaration of Finances.
And what are some of the resources available to help a family pay for college?
Okay, well, as we talked about, need-based aid potentially, but I'd probably put that lower on my list. Again, for international students, merit aid or merit scholarships, so money that the school is giving to the student for specific reasons, academics, special student populations, and that's going to vary depending on what the school thinks is special, right? Skills, abilities, many of the same reasons that a domestic student would be eligible for this type of resource. And, this is again one of the challenges for international students. You think money and scholarships, you automatically want to call and contact the financial aid office. It's actually the admissions office you want to be interacting with about these opportunities, keeping in mind the question of selectivity that we discussed where, at certain schools, these resources just don't exist. Beyond that, private scholarships, right? So external from the college, not restricted to US citizens or permanent residents. I want to put a plug in for our blog. I know over the years we've written several posts about different scholarship opportunities. So if someone wants a little inspiration to get started, we have some information there. Additionally, we do also have it's a video series on YouTube for tips for financing your US education. So people can check that out as well for some more information. But private scholarships would be another way. It's merit, but it's coming from outside of the college.
Okay, great. All right, just because I don't want to run out of time, let's switch to US students studying
Sure.
outside. So what
Sure.
are some of the college finance challenges for US students who want to go outside the US?
Okay. Yeah, I think there's so much to talk about. So the US students, I think the common question is, and these are families who, have been saving much longer than the international students. So they're aware of college cost and have come to this decision that they're going to look at schools overseas. They want to know if what they've saved here in the US can be used overseas. I think that's probably the first question. And they want to understand if the school that they're looking at is on the list of schools that's maintained by the US Department of Education that's eligible to administer federal funds. If the school's there, then yes, they can use, and it's a very popular vehicle, a college-specific account, the 529 plan, been
Mhm.
around for like 35 years. So you can use all that money that you've been hard at work saving for this education. Merit aid is still a thing, right? Just like it is here in the US, it's still a thing overseas, likely less, or I should say overall less than here, usually tied to more programs of studies or testing. You know, a student got a certain score on their SATs, there's a corresponding dollar amount. More selective schools, I would say, overseas sort of have the merit programs than just a general, you know, here's what we can offer all students. And of course, private scholarships as well. There's scholarships for US students who choose to study overseas for college.
Okay, great. And can students work while they're
Mm.
studying abroad?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's one of those, it depends, right? It depends. So it depends on the country, depends on your student visa. So maybe, right? And certainly working is a great way to earn money for indirect expenses, you know, your laundry detergent, going out with friends. It may be limited to working only during summer or like vacation periods, not during term time. So that's one thing. But the best practice, Sally, really is to contact the international student advisor or office on that campus, because when you start kind of looking at working, you're looking at immigration, you know, regulations, and you don't want to be out of status and get into trouble there. So it depends.
Okay. And so can somebody borrow a loan for college overseas? A US
Overseas.
student? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's a little bit easier than an international student borrowing for education here, which is possible, a little more difficult. US students, it's a little bit easier. You know, they're a US student, they may be looking at a US lender to apply the money overseas. I have found that the international school typically needs to have some sort of relationship with that US based lender. First step would always be to check out the like student finance office or payment center. They'll have a listing there, not only about parent loans, right? Or the student loans. So again, that list of schools that the US Department of Ed maintains, students can also borrow that direct loan that they're able to use here in the US, borrow it and fill out the FAFSA, borrow it and use it overseas. So it is still possible to finance your education.
I think it's worth noting too that a lot of overseas schools are much less expensive, even though
Mm.
it's more expensive for US students than the domestic students of that country.
Yep.
It can be still cheaper than even like a typical public university here, right?
Yeah, and it could be a 3-year degree, right? Some of the
Mhm.
kids that we work with, they're looking at schools in countries where it's 3 years. I usually say, just for anyone kind of listening in, it's the equivalent of like an out-of-state public, right? So nationwide here in the US, about $44,000 or so. Kind of go with that. You know, it's not going to be the 80,000 private
Mm,
institution cost here in the US. It's not going to be your in-state public where you get that discount, but
mhm.
sort of somewhere in that out-of-state public.
Okay. And I
Yeah,
think, didn't Germany a few years ago say that they were going to be free for everybody, not just their own students?
right. I remember reading that. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
that could have changed by now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Things change all the time. But yeah, there are certain countries where even for US students going there, you know, international students overseas, there are big discounts.
Yeah, which I thought was really quite exciting. So I think it is worth it for students to take a look for sure.
Mhm.
Um, any last comments, even for either for international students studying in the US or US students studying outside the US? Oh, I forgot to
Yeah.
ask
Oh,
you,
sure.
can international students in the US work while they're in college?
International students. Sort of, it depends again. There are certain programs with that F1 student visa where you can work up to 20 hours during school and more during school break periods. Always, always, always check in with the international student officer on campus. So you're maintaining good status. Some schools, though, I know one of the new coworkers on the finance side, she worked at a school. She was telling me where they had an international student work study. So it wasn't federal work study, but it was a way to help students earn money for, those indirect expenses who weren't eligible for the federal program. So some schools do have neat pockets like that, but as far as anything else, that international student officer is for you, and they're a great kind of starting point for any of these cost type questions.
All right, great. Robin, thank you so much for
My
appearing on the
pleasure,
show.
Sally. My
All right,
pleasure.
great.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, so everyone be sure to join us next week when our host Beth Heaton and finance colleague Shannon Vasconcelos will be answering listener questions. And please remember to rate us on iTunes. You can find us every Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on Voice America and also on YouTube. And have a great week.